Chapter 13 of the Moral Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Moral Pirates by William Livingston Alden. Harry sets out in pursuit of the boat. The cruise up the Shroon was a delightful one while it lasted. The river was so narrow that the trees on either side frequently met, forming a green and shady arch. Although there was a road not far from the river, and there were houses and small villages at a little distance from its banks, the boys, while in their boat, saw nothing but the water, the trees, and the sky, and felt as far removed from civilization as if they were sailing on an African river. They saw nothing to shoot after their adventure with Joe's bear, and there were no signs of fish in the water. But they delighted in the wild and solitary river, and were very much disappointed when, at the close of the day, they reached a dam so high that it seemed hopeless to try to carry the boat around it. Before camping, they walked some distance above the dam, and found that the river was completely blocked up with logs, which had been cut in the forest above and floated down to the sawmill. The men at the mill said that the boys would find the river choked with logs for a distance of nearly 3 miles, and that a little farther up it became a mere brook, too shallow and rapid to be navigated with the White Wing. It was clear that the cruise on the Shroon had come to an end, and that it would be necessary to hire a wagon to take the boat to the lake. Having reached this decision, the boys made their camp, and being very tired, put off engaging a team until morning. When morning came, one of the men at the mill came to see them while they were at breakfast, and advised them not to go to Shroon Lake. He said that the lake was full of houses, by which he meant that there were a great many houses along its banks, and that if they were to go there, they would find neither shooting nor fishing. He urged them to go to another lake, which they had never heard of before, Brant Lake. It was no farther off than Shroon Lake, and was full of fish. Besides, it was a wild mountain lake, with only 2 or 3 houses near it. The boys thanked him, and gladly accepted his advice. They had supposed that Shroon Lake was in the wilderness, and were exceedingly glad to find out their mistake in a time to select a more attractive place. The owner of the sawmill furnished them with a wagon, and soon after breakfast they started for Brant Lake. When, after a pleasant ride, they came in sight of the lake, they were overjoyed to find how wild and beautiful it was. Steep and thickly wooded hills surrounded it, except at the extreme southern point, where they launched their boat. It was not more than 2 miles wide at the widest part, and was about 5 miles in length, and they could see but 2 houses, one on the east and the other on the west shore. They eagerly hoisted the sail and started up the lake to search for a permanent camping ground, and, after spending the afternoon in examining almost the entire line of shore, they selected a little rocky island in the upper part of the lake, which seemed made for their purpose. There was a great deal of work to be done, for they intended to stay at Brant Lake for a fortnight. They had to clear away the underbrush and cut down several small trees to make room for the tent. Then a small landing place had to be built of stones and logs, so that the boat could approach the island without striking on the sharp rocks which surrounded it. Then the stores were all to be taken out of the boat, and placed where they would be dry and easy of access. The provisions had, by this time, become nearly exhausted, but the boys had been told that they could get milk, eggs, butter, bread, and vegetables at one of the houses, which was not more than a mile from the camp, so they were not troubled to find that, of their canned provisions, nothing was left except a can of peaches. Of course, all this work was not done in one day. On the afternoon of their arrival at the lake, the boys merely pitched the tent and then went fishing with a view to supper. Fishing with drop lines from a large rock at one end of their little island, they caught perch as fast as they could pull them in, good-sized pickerel, and 2 or 3 catfish. That night they ate a supper that would have made a boarding-house keeper weep tears of despair, and went to bed rather happier than they had ever felt before. Tom was to row over to the house for milk and other provisions in the morning, but when morning came the boat was gone. She had broken loose during the night, not having been properly fastened, and had floated quietly away. A faint speck was visible on the surface of the lake about 2 miles away, which Harry, who had remarkably good eyes, said was the White Wing. Whether he was right or wrong, it was quite certain that the boys were imprisoned on the island, with nothing to eat but a can of peaches and some coffee and sugar. The fish, however, were waiting to be caught, and before very long a breakfast of fish and of coffee without milk was ready. The boys then began to discuss the important question of how they were to get back their boat, or to get away from the island. It was a mile to the shore, and nobody felt able to swim that distance. Joe proposed that they fasten one of their shirts to a tall tree as a signal of distress, and then fire the gun every minute. The objection to this plan was that the nearest house was out of sight, behind a little point of land, and that no one would see the signal, or would understand why the gun was fired. Then Tom proposed to build a raft, on which 2 boys could paddle after the runaway boat. This was a practicable suggestion, and it was at once put into execution. It was hard work to cut down timber enough to build a raft, but, by perseverance, the raft was finished before noon. It consisted of 4 logs laid side by side and bound together with handkerchiefs, shoestrings, green twigs, and a few strips from one of Harry's shirts, which he said was unnecessarily long. It was covered with 2 or 3 pieces of flat driftwood, and when it was finished, a piece of board was found which was shaped with a hatchet into a rude paddle. Then Tom and Harry proceeded to embark. The raft floated Harry very well, but promptly sank when Tom also stepped on it. Either more timber must be added to it, or one boy must go alone in search of the boat. Harry insisted upon going at once, and as the lake was perfectly smooth, and he could swim well, there did not seem to be great risk in his making the voyage alone. Bidding the boys good-bye, he paddled slowly away, and left his comrades to anxiously wait for his return. It was ticklish work paddling the raft. The logs were fastened together so insecurely, owing to the fact that all the rope was in the runaway boat, that Harry was in constant fear that they would come apart, and was obliged to paddle very carefully to avoid putting any strain on the raft. With such a craft speed was out of the question, and after an hour of hard work, the raft was only halfway between the island and the boat. Harry was not easily discouraged, however, and he paddled on, knowing that if nothing happened, he must reach the boat in course of time. Something did happen. When, after paddling for more than 2 hours, the White Wing was rather less than a quarter of a mile from the raft, Harry missed a stroke with his paddle and tumbled over. He struck the raft with his shoulder and went through it as easily as if it had been fastened together with paper. When he came to the surface again, he found that the raft had separated into its original logs, and that his voyage on it was ended. Luckily, the White Wing was now within swimming distance, so he struck out for her, and finally crept into her over the stern, so much exhausted that he had to lie down and rest before taking to the oars. Had the raft gone to pieces half an hour sooner, he would have been in a dangerous position, for it is doubtful if he could have clung to one of the logs long enough to drift to the shore without becoming totally exhausted. The boys on the island did not witness the end of Harry's raft, for it was too far away when the accident occurred for them to see anything but a little black dot on the water. They became, however, very anxious about him as the hours went by and he did not come back. Tom was especially uneasy, and blamed himself for permitting Harry to go alone. He thought of making another raft and going in search of Harry, but there were no more strings with which to fasten logs together, and he did not quite like to tear up his clothes and use them for that purpose. He did, however, resolve that, if Harry did not come in sight within another hour, he would take a small log, and, putting it under his arms, try to swim to the mainland and borrow a boat, if one could be found, in which to search for his comrade. He was spared this hazardous experiment, for toward the end of the afternoon, Harry and the White Wing came in sight, and were welcomed with a tremendous cheer. Tom took the boat and went for provisions, and when he returned, the White Wing was not only dragged on shore, but fastened to 2 different trees with 2 distinct ropes. The boys were determined that she should not escape again, and when Joe proposed that somebody should sit up with her all night, so that she could not cut the ropes and run away, Tom seriously considered the proposal. The next day a snug little dock was built, in which she seemed quite contented, and from which she could not escape without climbing over a stone breakwater, a feat of which there was no reason to believe that she was capable. End of chapter 13. Read by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona, January 14, 2023.